Okay. Okay. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Silent church, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead, have your notes out. We're going to be continuing on page 3. Woo! Page 3 of the handout. We're actually going to go through these in a fairly, we're going to go through fairly quickly. See how many of this criminal civil rights we're going to be getting to, trial criminal rights and so forth, as we continue on. And we will wrap up one of the last big issues as far as this particular unit is concerned is the issue of abortion. And, yes, pay attention to the news.
Yeah, I heard about the
There you go. How many of you guys have heard that? The United States Supreme Court accepted a case. Yeah, it's a Mississippi case. Mississippi passed a law, I want to say this is like a year or two ago. And it's going through the court system, and it had a ban on abortions beginning at 15 weeks, except for if there's a medical emergency or severe fetal abnormality. No exceptions on whether rape or incest and so forth. That is unconstitutional according to Roe versus Wade. But Ivan, is it possible for the Supreme Court to change its mind? Yeah, I mean, give me the name of a case where the Supreme Court changed its mind from a previous Supreme Court decision. Really? And what did Brown versus Board of Education get rid of? Okay. Do you remember the name of the case? Anybody remember the name of the case? Police. Can you remember the name of the case? Yeah. Do you remember the name of the case? Very good. Plessy versus Ferguson was the very first separate but equal, that segregation is cool and everything like that. And you're right, Brown versus Board of Education got rid of that. So sometimes the Supreme Court can do that. And it'll be very interesting. We've already got a new slide having to do with that. How many people did it take for the Supreme Court to accept that case upon review?
I don't know.
5 out of 4.
Only takes 4, remember? It only takes 4. Oh, yeah, and Brown versus Board of Education, there was a 9-0 decision. But as far as this latest thing, and this is something people, and you guys as well, on the issue of abortion, because we're going to spend a lot of time going through the nuances and so forth and how we got to where we are. That's something that people have been looking at for quite some time. And that Mississippi case has been on appeal, waiting for the Supreme Court to say, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Can you just go up to the Supreme Court and go, hey, what's going on? No, you can't really do that, no. I mean, you can stand out on the street and yell and so forth, all right? Yeah, well, no, I mean... But they did answer, so they're going to take that case. So anyway, we're going to get into all of these details as we go through. You guys ready? All right, let's get to it. All right. First one, ADA. Spells Americans with Disabilities Act. All right, here we go. Yeah. Ada County. Ada. All right, here we go. ADA. All right. This is the first thing I'm going to say about this. ADA, go ahead, write this down. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and similar laws that have been passed having to do specifically with education. So we're going to go over this. The first thing I want to tell you about this is this isn't in the Constitution. And nobody says it's in the Constitution. ADA is not in the First Amendment. It's not in the Second. It's not in the Third. It's not in anywhere in the 27th. It's not in the original 7 articles. Who says that ADA can be a whole bunch of civil rights? The normal way that many laws are passed, it passed by Congress and was signed by the president. Raise your hand if you're very clever and you can figure out which president, it's not up there, but it's up there. Which president signed ADA into law? Yep. Number 41, write that down. George H.W. Bush, Republican president, father of George W. Bush. George H.W. Bush signed this into law. This was a product of, it's remarkable, Republicans and Democrats coming together to create laws that create civil rights for people with disabilities. Got that? They did! They did! Yeah, when my dad was in Congress in the late 60s, early 70s and so forth, yeah, sometimes you just have to do that. You know? Especially if you had mixed government. Like, for example, when my dad was in Congress, pretty much all the time he was there, there was a Republican president, but the Democrats were in the majority in the House and the Senate. When George H.W. Bush was president, trying to remember, I want to say the Democrats were in charge of at least the House or the Senate, or it was close. So sometimes you just got to work together. Okay? And this was something that they agreed on. Write this down so it's very clear. These rights that we're talking about are created by Congress and the President. Therefore, can the Supreme Court interpret what these rights are? Well, yes, they can, but if the Supreme Court says, well, I think this is what Congress and the President meant to say in this law, right? And then Congress and the President was like, no, that's not what we meant. Does it take a constitutional amendment to overturn whatever Supreme Court decision was there? No. All it takes is a change in the law. Do you understand that? So in fact, write this down this way. It's easy for Congress and the President to change these around, and they have done so. Okay? As opposed to other things that we'll get to, and we have gotten through quite a bit, where it's a constitutional right. Who can change a constitutional right? Supreme Court, or you can get a constitutional amendment, which is not really easy to do. Lizzie, what does it take to get a constitutional amendment?
No. Two-thirds of the House and Senate.
Good. Very good, yeah. Which has been done how many times in our country's history? 27 times. Yeah, so it's not easy to do. But to get laws changed and so forth, I wanted to mention that because this is an important package of rights, very, very important to people in this country. And I'm going to go through all those, but just I wanted to get that out right at the get-go. The Supreme Court is not as involved in this compared to other issues like, right now, abortion. Because if the Supreme Court says, hey, we don't agree with what your state has done on the laws having to do with abortion, they have, since Roe versus Wade, said it is a constitutional right. Okay, so that's going to be an interesting question to see how long that goes up. But none of this is constitutional right stuff. Now, is it important? Oh my gosh, heck yeah. Let's go ahead and identify what is covered under ADA and similar federal laws. You ready? It covers this. Obviously, people who have disabilities. All right, so we're going to go through some disabilities. We're also going to go through some areas that it's covered, okay? And most of these areas that it's covered, what do you think, public or private? Public, okay? Although, there's going to be some overlaps. Here we go. Here's a big one. Education. Education. Oh, yeah. The example I like to give is, have you guys ever seen Forrest Gump, the movie? Okay, right? So in Forrest Gump, does he have an educational disability? Yes, okay? All right, and he's well played by Tom Hanks and so forth. Does he have complete access to a public education as is portrayed in the film? No. Okay, because the public schools at that particular time would look and say, in order to be eligible to get a public education, you need to reach a certain IQ level. Okay, I don't want to go through the entire scene of how he managed to get through that because that's all like, yeah, anyway, it's like, whatever. So, but the thing was, it's like, if you had a disability that impaired your ability to get a normal education like all the other kids, they kept you out of school. I mean, it's like, that part is true. They kept you out of school. What about physical disabilities? You could be kept out of school there. What about hearing, eyesight? All kinds of things. All right, so put this down. If you have some sort of a disability that impairs your educational opportunities and opportunity for achievement and so forth, that's federal law. In fact, I want you to write that down. This is federal law. So I suppose a state can give more rights, but mostly what we're talking about is the federal law applies across the country. Okay? And in the area of education, if you are a student who has some sort of an identifiable disability, whose responsibility is it to come up with a plan for the student to achieve their best opportunity? The school, exactly. So some of you guys know this because they're sort of like you've got individualized educational plan, IEPs, then you got something from the code relative to section 504. So, variabilities and so forth. Meetings are set up with school officials and teachers and parents and students. And what's the goal? Come up with the plan. I'll give you an example. My nephew, severe hearing loss. When he was going through the Boise school districts, from elementary all the way up through high school, they had to come up with a plan to make sure that he could hear what was going on. So raise your hand if you can just, I don't know, because you can all be experts in this sort of thing. Raise your hand if you can imagine what kinds of things went into his IEP, which was his right, and you would be in violation of his rights if you didn't follow through on this. What do you think? Go ahead. What's that? Could be an interpreter. Yeah, when I worked at the year I was gone, I worked at Jefferson Elementary, and they were actually within the Boise School District. There were quite a few kids who were there who had severe hearing difficulties, and so they would have interpreters. They would also have, in fact, I can remember trying to explain math and other kinds of things to little kids, and I would say something, and then the interpreter would hand gesture it and so forth. You'd also have some assisted technologies, so you could have, like, sometimes it would be helpful to have the masks on and so forth. Teacher, you would have, like, it hooked up, like a microphone and so forth. Teachers were instructed to give assistance. In fact, what I'm wearing here, I don't know if anybody in particular here, but it's okay. It's not like we're going to walk around and go, oh, I need to see this and so forth. But having this shield, in addition to me being able to breathe, which is good, you could also, why is this assistant to somebody who has a hearing issue? Lip reading, exactly. Because lip reading is very, very important. Yeah, so anyway, those are the kinds of things that might get into an IEP and so forth on that. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so in education, you have those access, those opportunities. It's very, very important. Okay, now here's an interesting little kicker. You can write this down. The federal government says you have to do it, all local public schools and so forth around the country. Does the federal government provide all of the necessary funding in order to meet that? Not quite. Not quite. Which creates an interesting thing sometimes, and that's why when you look at these kinds of laws, the ADA and the similar ones having to do with education, you get a sense of sort of practicality involved, okay? As in, sometimes it's just really, really expensive to make it comply with where you would like to go. I'll give you some examples of that later on. But in the field of public education, that's where it is. Now, throw this out to you. Private schools, do they have to follow all of those federal laws? No. They don't receive the any federal money or state money. So therefore, they don't necessarily have to. They can, because it certainly would provide opportunities for all the families and kids and so forth that want to participate in that private school. Do you understand that? Homeschool, do you have to provide that? No. No. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you in a homeschool situation, obviously, a homeschool educational thing is going to be very much tailored to the actual kids who are actual things. If you have somebody with a disability, do you imagine the homeschool parent, teacher, whatever coalition is going to focus on trying to help that kid out? Hello? Yeah, I mean, yeah. I hope so. Yeah. Shh.
You do have to provide for helping for teaching for disabilities if they're homeschooled. A parent can't force their child out of school, right? And so if they're not educating their child, then they have to put them into a public school.
Actually, I don't want to go too far off on a track on this one. It really varies from state to state to state as far as like homeschool opportunities, homeschool choices. Idaho is probably among the most open as far as allowing parents to homeschool their kids. Other states are much more restrictive. They basically say if you want to do that, then you need to meet this. The state is stepping in kind of like a parent and saying we need to make sure that the kids are this. Idaho is much more hands-off. It's kind of like, okay, we trust the parents to do what you need to do. And hopefully, and I've seen this over the years, sometimes homeschool education can be really high quality. Sometimes not so much. It really depends on the parents and so forth who are involved in that. But other states, I mean, they really attach a lot of strings and so forth to it. Okay? Here are some other things. ADA, and this one applies very, very specifically. You ready? This is going to be in the area of access, physical access to public buildings and things that are open to the public. So let's go through and identify those. Obviously, this, North Star, is a public building. So you need to be able to have access. As a one-story building, is that too tricky? No. When I was teaching at Capitol High School, how are they going to be able to provide for access to students who are in a wheelchair? They have to have they actually did. They had one elevator. It was all the way on the other side of the school building from the classroom that I taught in, which had created a little bit of a challenge because we had to make accommodations, and we actually had to figure this out and make a plan for it. If there was a fire drill, and I can remember the particular student, he was in a wheelchair. Lizzie! Lizzie, there are federal penalties. Oh! Caden, can you believe that a student would just open their mouth and say something that was just so highly offensive and insensitive to the other people? I think that's terrible. Anna, can you believe that she did that? We did. Yeah, we did. Down the stairs. Yeah. Yeah. Shh. So, Lizzie, this isn't some sad, horrific, twisted movie that you are planning. No. So anyway, is that right? Okay, well, that's too bad. All right, so anyway, shh. So here, put this down. Shh. Never you mind. So put this down. So things that are open to the public as well. So we got all the public buildings, official courthouses, and things like that. You have to have it. But things that are also open to the public, like hotels, restaurants, stores, right? If they're open to the public, then there needs to be some access and accommodation so that people can get in and out and so forth. Does that make sense? Now, notice this. There's a cost involved in doing that. And so practically, what the lawmakers have done is they've granted some leeway for older buildings. You can write that down. Because it costs a lot to retrofit an older building with staircases and things like that and so forth and so on. It's very much a high expense. So there's some accommodation there. I'm not saying that they're going to completely ignore it. There's some accommodation there. But if you were a new construction, you're going to need to follow all of the rules and regs and so forth to meet it just bang right on there. Does that make sense? That's where I'm talking about some of that practicality, okay, with ADA. All right. Transportation, write that down. Transportation, access to transportation. So if you got a public bus system and so forth, does the bus need to have a way so that they can transport people who are in wheelchairs? Yes. Okay, so different cities do it different ways and so forth. Sometimes they have, the buses with the wheelchair accessible and so forth in all of them. Sometimes you have to sort of like call up ahead of time to make sure that among the buses that have that capability, that those are the ones that are on the routes and so forth. Does that make sense? Okay? Even like walking across the street and so forth. Okay? If you can't hear, or if you can't see, do they have things that will help you get across the street? Yes. The little bumps, and then it'll also have like the sound thing. So you go into some communities and so forth. I would say, here's the deal. You're going to find those accommodations much more prevalent in larger urban areas where you have a higher population and so forth. But over the years, more and more, I look around like around here, and I've seen bit by bit, like curbsides on street corners, making it more ramp accessible and so forth, so you can get on and off and so forth. It makes it really easier if you're, on a skateboard, but it also makes it easier if you're somebody that has that challenge. Okay, communication devices and so forth. It's going to be very, very important. Communication. So if you're trying to communicate with the government and you can't hear, are they going to be able to give some kind of an accommodation, some tech support and so forth on that? Yes, they're going to be required to. Okay, question?
Are you able to text the police? Like
I-
911?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of those things are there, and they're there because of the law. And here's the deal. It's kind of like, all right, we value every person, and we want to make it possible for every person to have the most access to a full life in the community as possible. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, employment. Write this down. Employment. There are rights with respect to employment. Now, employment, if it's offered to the public and so forth, you're going to need to be very conscientious of like what kinds of things are going to be required to you by the ADA as far as like discrimination. This is where it gets a little controversial. Okay, so I'll give you a couple things here. Person is applying for a job. Okay, they're legally blind, and they're told they can't have the job because they're legally blind. Now, I haven't given you all the details as far as what the job was, but is this a violation of ADA? Well, you think practically. I'll give you several different choices here. If the position was for, let's say, a call center, could they actually get the job done without sight at a call center? Sure, yeah. In fact, you're relying primarily on auditory things, and you could have some various different things there. How about for a pilot for a airlines? Okay, so that one, those are fairly straightforward, okay? You got that? Those are fairly straightforward. If you're talking about the disability could potentially create some dangers if you overlook the disability and so forth, like pilots, and you're like, well, you just push a button and that takes care of it, right? You still kind of need that. Now, where it gets really controversial, here we go. You ready? Okay. We've got the two different positions. I need some help on this one. Robbie, you're going to be the person, you're going to give me my legal advice. Do I have a case to bring a lawsuit? Let's say I'm a person with who experiences epileptic seizures. Okay? I have epilepsy. And I'm applying for a job. Okay? And they've said, no, we're not going to give you that job. You have epilepsy. And I say, oh, wait, I think I'm going to talk to my attorney, Robbie. He is going to tell me whether or not I've got an ADA case so that this person can't use that against me and discriminate against me because of my disability. Okay? You got that? Now, which of those cases do I have a better opportunity of winning? The call center or the United Airlines pilot? I've got epilepsy. Which of them am I going to be able to say, hey, you know, you can't prevent me from doing that job? The call center. Why not? Or why? Okay, so there's no endangerment and so forth. Can you think of some relevant questions that would go along with a diagnosis of epilepsy that are relevant to whether I should or should not be able to get that job? Can you think of any? I'm going to open it up to the class to give what are some relevant pieces of information that will help me to sort of sort this out? We'll start here.
Last seizure.
Very good, okay? Last seizure. So the further back it took place, the less of a concern, obviously. Okay, so that's a good one. Let's hear another one. Very good. Am I on medication? And let's just follow it up with that. Am I on medication that is helping to reduce the seizures? And that's going to tie into, like, when was the last seizure and so forth. So if I have been, I can just ask you guys, how many of you guys, if you're on the panel that's determining whether or not there's a violation, I've just applied for United Airlines, I've got epilepsy, I'm on medication, I haven't had a seizure in 20 years. How many of you guys are going to say that when United Airlines says I can't even apply for the position, that they are potentially in violation of ADA? How many guys are going to say, no, it's still at risk? So you can see where that's where it's going to be. The call center, I'm good to go on that one. But even the other ones, you're going to have those practical factors coming through. Any other words? Yes? What's that? Service dog, actually, that could be like an animal that could help identify whether or not there's some early signs of somebody about to go into an epileptic seizure. Good questions. All right? All right, this is good stuff. ADA is huge. It's very, very important. How about this one? Well, this is a controversial one. Is alcoholism a disability? It's a tricky one because are some people more prone to ill effects and becoming addicted to alcohol? Yes. Okay. Although Gabe was like, what was that word you used? Choice? Yeah, it's a choice. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a harder choice for some than others. Yeah. So those are the ones that are kind of fighting it out in the courts and so forth. And I would say that the courts are being pretty relaxed because ultimately, who decides what is and what isn't in ADA? The Supreme Court? No. Who? Congress. And where is Congress connected fairly closely to the attitudes and opinions of the American people? Yeah, I mean, they get elected, you know. So, yeah. Yes, go. Okay. All right. ADA, very important. Okay. I like it. I'm glad we have this. This is huge. Your life's opportunities and human opportunities are much, much improved, thankfully, because Republicans and Democrats in my lifetime got together and said, shh, now don't tell me that you're talking because you can't pay attention because you've got a disability. I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think you're making a choice. I'm with Gabe on it. I think you're making a choice. Choice. That's a. Okay, yes, go ahead, Caden. Shh. I think that's sign language. I don't know. I can't tell you. Let's move on. All right, here we go. Now let's jump into the package of criminal civil rights. Write this down. Criminal civil rights. This is where I pull out my old card of having worked on the the Idaho Supreme Court, not the United States Supreme Court, and Ada County Prosecutor's Office. Mm-mm. No, it was a Supreme Court, you know. So, here we go. You ready? Ladies and gentlemen, shh. These rights that we're talking about here are, I think almost without exception, United States Supreme Court decisions on constitutional rights, primarily the rights that are contained in the Bill of Rights. Okay? And most of these are going to be relevant in the context of criminal cases, which is why sometimes in the past I would put it to students and say, oh, here's a whole bunch of civil rights, and a lot of them are criminal justice rights. And I would say, oh my gosh, do you really want to memorize them all? And they would look and go, no, Mr. Henson, I don't want to have to memorize them all. And I'd say, oh, well, great. Then value them. The ones that are most important, we'll keep. And the ones that aren't as important to you, we'll get rid of. Maybe you don't even have to know them. And of course, if you don't know them, you don't know if you've been had them violated against you. And inevitably, what often happens is people are like, oh, I like my voting right, and I like equality, I like my speech rights, but those criminal justice rights, I mean, I don't never need those. You might, unless you're charged with a crime. You know, it's so fascinating because some of you guys remember last semester when we were talking about totalitarian countries like the Soviet Union. Did they have criminal justice rights? No. You are charged. You plead for mercy from the court. That's basically it. You go from charge to punishment. What? You have rights. You have right to sit and listen. I mean, it's messed up. Yeah, it's messed up. And it's really sad, in places like Hong Kong that used to have more, and now they have less because Hong Kong is being sort of under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. In our country, we do. And in fact, write this down. I think it's fair to say that criminal justice rights are greater in the United States than even some democracies. Okay? Now, it is tricky because sometimes, write this down, sometimes people are like, Your criminal justice rights, they get in the way of good law enforcement. We need good law enforcement. We need stability and peace, domestic security, right? Remember we talked about that early last semester? How can we live happily in a community unless there's domestic security, unless there's peace in the streets, instead of being attacked by all kinds of things? So, which is it if the police have messed up and didn't follow your constitutional rights? Some people would say, oh, that's like, oh my gosh, the judge let them off on a technicality. And somebody else would go, no, actually that technicality was the enforcement of a constitutional right. So as we go through these, we're going to see the Supreme Court puts a very high value on these. Okay? All right. You're like, good. Yeah. In fact, they'll say things like, it is better to let 100 guilty go free than to let one innocent be wrongly condemned. And other people are like, I don't know about that calculation. How about 100 mass murders go free than to let one innocent go free to the same place, in a cage match, It's like, so, trust me, on this one, this is interesting because there's a sense, people are always watching because there's a sense that do we need good protection of our rights? And everyone said yes. Do we need good law enforcement so that people are safe living in their communities? And everyone said yes there too. Can we have both? We hope so. Which is why, write this down, police officers are among the most well-educated people as far as constitutional rights. They are, and they should be continually updated. And if they are not paying attention to their requirements as far as what they're supposed to do in a given situation, they could end up in a lot of trouble, being prosecuted themselves for violating the civil rights of people in the community, especially if that violation causes the person to stop breathing. Okay? That could be very bad for you. All right? So let's go through each of these different component parts. The due process clause. Here we go. 5th and 14th. This is what you write down. Due process. And in fact, there it is. Due process. No deprivation of your life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, sometimes including a trial. Do you see that right there? Okay, it's in the handout. Okay? You can pull up it on Google Classroom if you want. You can add it to that because it is a document there. So, life, liberty, or property, you got to get some kind of a case and so forth. So, I mean, it could be even as something as, you're not talking about, going to jail, but if a student, if the school, public school, wants to, remove that student, expel them, they've got to go through a process. So you have a hearing. You have an opportunity to present, to hear the evidence being presented against you, to bring in counsel if necessary. Does that make sense? Some kind of a hearing. Sometimes it's a full-blown out trial, but something. Otherwise, your life can't be taken away, your liberty, or your property. And in this sense, I suppose, attendance at a public school might be your property. So, what's the difference between the 5th and 14th? I'll tell you. 5th applies to the federal government. 14th applies to state governments. You're like, well, don't we have separate amendments that apply all of our First Amendment rights and our Second Amendment rights and Third Amendment and Fourth Amendment to the states as well? Well, the Supreme Court kind of looked at it and said, yeah, we're just going to kind of incorporate those. So what also applied to the federal government initially now applies to the states. Don't worry about it. If you got a right to a gun, can the federal government take that away? Can the state government take it away? Under what right? Under what amendment? Number two. Now, of course, that depends. And the Supreme Court has taken on a gun rights case as well. So it's going to be really interesting next year when those issues kind of come through. Okay? All right. Due process, pretty straightforward as far as that goes. Obviously, it's very, very complex as you get into the particular cases. But I've got a whole bunch of them, so let's go to this next one. This one is a fun one. You ready? The Fourth Amendment. Okay? Fourth Amendment. Unreasonable search and seizure. It says so right here. Unreasonable search and warrantless searches and seizures generally prohibited. So in other words, If the police want to go into a place, let me see, what kind of places? That might be your car, your house for sure. Maybe your I don't know, the locker's controlled by the school, so maybe the rules don't apply. My apartment, no, the apartment's a little iffy because the landlord has actually got control of the apartment. So there's a lot of questions about where it applies. But if the police want to go in there, they got to have a warrant. A warrant showing what? A warrant showing that there is an association with criminal activity. So write that down. You've got to have that association with criminal activity. A warrant. Where do you get a warrant from? A judge. What do you have to go to the judge with in order to get the warrant? Hey, Your Honor, I want a warrant. I want to go into his house and look for evidence of crime. I think there might be some. Can I have a warrant? Oh, I have to show some additional evidence to show that there's like potentially criminal activity and so forth there. If I do, then I get the warrant? Cool, great. All right, so that's the deal. So if somebody comes up to your house, ready? Knock, knock, knock. Hello, who's it? It's the police. Do you have a warrant? I love that. No, we just want to come in and talk to you. You gonna let me in? Okay, oh, there we go. All right. So, very important because let's just get to this. Let's just get to this right away. If the police just, this is very important. If the police just ignore you and say, I don't need no stinking warrant, I'm going to come on in here because that door is not strong enough to hold me. I'm going to barge on in there because I believe there's criminal activity taking place in your home. And I'm going to stop it because we just need to do something to stop criminals. Got that? The heck with the Constitution. So I go barging on in there. You know, no warrant. I've got a hunch. That's all I got is a hunch. And I go barging in there, and I do find a treasure trove of all kinds of criminal activity. So I want to go into the court. Listen carefully. I want to go into the court, and I want to present that evidence as part of criminal charges against you. What do you mean you can't? So what? Oh, here's the deal. Now, write this down, because this is important. Is there anything in the Constitution that says what happens if the warrant isn't there, the police ignore the Fourth Amendment, and they just go charging in, and they find a bunch of really good evidence? Is there anything that in the Constitution actually talks about that? No. It says that, no, it just says you're not supposed to do that. So here, if I'm the police, I'll be like, okay, Your Honor, go ahead. I won't do it again. Just, have you ever been punished and the punishment really wasn't punishment? Raise your hand if you've ever been punished and the punishment was so light you really, honestly, were not deterred. In fact, you're thinking, wow, I can push this thing quite a bit of a ways. Honestly, think about this. If you're the police, are you going to be in a better position stopping crime if you get more evidence, period, regardless of whether or not it came from a warrant or not? I mean, warrants are such a hassle. Whose are the best police? The ones that find the criminal evidence and put the most bad guys away in jail? Yes? Or the ones that abide by your constitutional rights? We'll take a couple of questions on this, and we're going to see. Guess who's going to jump into the mix and go, we've got a solution. Yeah, the Supreme Court. I mean, guess who the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is going to be when the Supreme Court steps in and goes, yeah, this is the way it's going to work from here on out on the Fourth Amendment. It's going to be Earl Warren. It'll be the Warren Court. Now, you could say, oh, that is a activist court. But sometimes people look and go, honestly, do you think they're going to amend the Constitution to provide more protection for criminals that have had their Fourth Amendment rights violated? I don't think so. Take a couple questions and we'll talk about the case. Oh yeah, we're going to get into some exceptions and so forth. I got some really interesting wrinkles. I mean, I could go on all day and actually for an entire course on evidence in law school.
Also, so are cops strictly vampire sex because you have to give them permission to go inside your house?
Not always, but generally, yes. Or the judge has given us a warrant. Okay, here we go. Here's the punishment. Here is the real punishment. The exclusionary rule. You ready? Let's get to it. I'm going to dive right into it, okay? And then we're going to talk about some of the exceptions. The case is called Mapp versus Ohio, 1961, okay? The Supreme Court announces what is going to be referred to as the exclusionary rule. It is huge, okay? It's the teeth behind the Fourth Amendment, and the teeth are not in the Fourth Amendment, but the Supreme Court is going to put the teeth in the Fourth Amendment. The Supreme Court will say, hey, you need to follow the rules of the Fourth Amendment. You need to get a warrant in most situations. We'll look at a couple of exceptions. Because if you don't, we're not going to let you use that evidence in court. Do you understand that? That's the way it is. And if you thought that, that's because you live in the United States of America right now, and the exclusionary rule has been in there for like 60 years. Got that?
So the idea that why would they not punish them was because the exclusionary rule wasn't there when you were talking about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, here's the deal. Today, if a police officer skips the warrant, just goes off the handle, you know, like some crazy, loose Hollywood movie plot, you know, the rogue police officer's like, the heck, I don't need to go see no judge. I'm going to take care of this right now. And they go barge in, right? So we barge into Isabel's house. We find all kinds of evidence and so forth there. Isabel gets lawyered up. She comes into the court, and we're like, we got all kinds of cases against you. And you're like, yeah, well, you know what? My attorney just filed all kinds of motions to exclude all that lovely evidence that you found. And guess what happens when you exclude all that evidence? Poof, there goes your case. Because if you can't bring the evidence in the case, you're going to be found not guilty. There, Caden, how good is that police officer who just blew a case by not going by the book, by not following the rules, by not respecting the constitutional rights of this person?
Yes, bad.
Bad. So here's the deal. That police officer's like, oh, you don't need to tell me you slap on the wrist. You just lost all the evidence in that case. Therefore, police officer, you just wasted the time, and now that person is free. And you go, oh, well, they got off on a technicality. Well, you know what? Those technicalities are also constitutional rights, and the Supreme Court, ever since Mapp versus Ohio, has put some teeth in those constitutional rights. So you better follow the book. Oh, there is, and we're going to go through some exceptions. We're going to go through some exceptions. In fact, I've got several of them right here. I've got, ready? Write this down. Plain view, emergency, undue pressure. Plain view, emergency, and undue pressure. Okay? Plain view. Do you have to honestly get a warrant when something is in plain view? All right, here we go. I need another perp. All right, you're the perp. Okay? You got a marijuana grow operation on the front yard. Okay? And it's in Idaho. It's not in Oregon. So it's illegal. So you got your marijuana grow operation going on in the front yard. I'm a police officer. I'm walking by, and I'm like, why, I see there's marijuana growing on the front yard there. I come in, and I seize it. Okay? I don't have a warrant. And he comes in with his lawyer, and he goes, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You didn't have that. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, seriously? It's in plain view. Anyone can see it. Easy exception. What the Fourth Amendment protects is your private space. And that's actually a very important thing. What is your private space? Your house? What about your car? Depends. If you walk by a car, you can look through the window. You can see all kinds of stuff in plain view. Can you see in plain view what's in the trunk? Or are you going to need a warrant? Or some kind of a thing there. Okay? What if it just, boom, happened to open up? Exactly. Yeah, and it's always tough because, like, if a little kid came along and opened up the trunk and the police officers look and they go, oh, plain view, is that okay? Sure, if the police officer gave some money to the little kid to bump into the trunk to open up the trunk so that it was plain view, nope, can't do that.
Wouldn't the kid be charged with breaking and entering?
Oh, forget, don't worry about it, yeah. Okay? It's a child. It's a child. Okay, I need another perp. Okay? You going to be the perp this time? I got a different crime. We got a different crime going on here. Another perp. Okay, we got a perp right here. Okay, who's your victim? Who? Connor is the victim. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. All right. Where are you going to run to?
Another country.
No. Somebody else's house. Here, go ahead, identify. Lizzie, okay, here we go. All right. So here we go. Shh. I'm a police officer. I'm playing it by the book. I don't want to get stuck on that Map versus Ohio exclusionary rule. All right? So here I see with my own eyes a crime occur. Boom! You took a gun and you took it and you shot Connor. Boom! On the street. Dead. A crime has occurred. I've seen a crime has occurred. And now, I'm like, oh, I got to arrest him. But here's the thing. MK has run into Lizzie's house. I'm like, ooh, darn it. Lizzie's got a house. A house. And so, question. Do I have to go get a warrant to go into Lizzie's house to catch this criminal who I've just seen commit a crime shooting Connor? No. Write this down. Emergency situations, you may not need to get a warrant. Shh. Listen carefully. You've seen the crime take place, and here's the real kicker. Because here's the reality. If I went to go get a warrant, I go to Judge Max over there, and Judge Max gives me the warrant to go to Lizzie's house to go get MK from the house, and of course Judge Max is going, yeah, you got the warrant, you can go to Lizzie's house. I don't think she's going to be there. No, you're going to be gone.
She came my dog.
Okay, so check this out. Shh. Check this out. You ready? Because we got some interesting little twists and turns and so forth here. So make sure you understand that. Emergency situation, because the perpetrator, could be fleeing the scene, I have a right under the emergency exception to go into the house in which you have run into. Do you understand that? Now that sucks to be for Lizzie, because in fact Lizzie, unbeknownst to MK and unbeknownst to me, has got a serious child trafficking situation going on in the house. Okay? And so here's the deal. So I come in, boom, kick the door down, you're under arrest. Back up, and then I look around going, oh, this looks bad. Question, okay? Judge Chris, I want to bring charges, the state, on behalf of the evidence that I've just obtained in being inside of Lizzie's house. I want to obtain, now, I didn't get a search warrant, but I was in her house going after MK legally. Can I use that evidence against Lizzie in that case?
I would say yes.
Was I legally in the house under that circumstances I've obtained there? Yes. Yes. Ooh, that worked out well. Got two bad criminals in one fell swoop. Got that? Okay. All right. And actually, it was fascinating. Several years ago in Boston, there was a bomber for the marathon. And he was basically hiding out in all kinds of neighborhood or backyards and like in somebody's, I think he was ultimately found in somebody's like boat in the back. Anyway, the law enforcement in that community were going house to house to house to house and looking all over the place. I think they were looking for the guy, but were they legally in all those houses as they were looking for the perpetrator? It's an interesting question. If they had a reasonable ground to believe that they were in the house, otherwise they were conducting just like a search all over the place. And people are like, yeah, let's get the bad guy. But they were also concerned about Fourth Amendment. Because they're like, wow, the government is sidestepping all these Fourth Amendment considerations for the purpose of catching the bad person, which they weren't sure, but they figured was somewhere in that neighborhood. Yes? Yes, I'm going to give you a scenario. You ready? Yeah. If you knock on the door and they let you come in, you're in. Although, you ready? Write this down. Or I'm going to give you a fact scenario. Okay? This goes back to when I was a deputy prosecutor a long time ago in a galaxy far away. Okay? I was a deputy prosecutor and I had a case. And this is going to be, you're going to evaluate whether or not undue pressure is applied in order to get something, right? So in other words, if I'm a police officer and I'm like, open up that car trunk, is that a valid method of obtaining consent to allow me to search by holding a gun at him? No, of course not. Well, how about this situation? How much pressure is undue pressure? A lot. Well, I'm going to ask you, because you're going to rule, ultimately, all of you guys are going to rule in this fact situation. This is a real fact situation. Okay? It was in one of the cases that I had way back when. And you're going to rule the evidence stays in, or no, the evidence goes out, undue pressure, violation of the Fourth Amendment. Okay, here we go. I had a case against a woman who was a mother. I think she had 2 small children, like little kids. And it was for possession of drug paraphernalia. The police officers who were involved in this particular case got a tip from a neighbor that this woman in her house was doing drugs. They decided, for efficiency's sake, rather than going to the judge and asking for a full-out warrant, that they were going to approach it a little differently this time. They were going to knock on the door and ask her if they could come in to talk to her. So that's what they did. They didn't show up with a warrant. They knocked on the door. They asked if they could come in, and she allowed them to come in. To talk to her.
Just talk to her.
Yes. So listen carefully. Let me tell the rest of the story. All right. So there they are in the living room. They're talking to her, and they're saying things like, we got a tip from an anonymous neighbor that you were doing drugs in your house. Okay?
Wow, what a thing.
Whoa, wow, we're giving names and so forth. Okay? And we just, we decided to come and talk to you. We could have gone to the judge to get a search warrant. And of course, within the parameter of our choices relative to the search warrant, we could, if need be, brought in a drug-sniffing dog. And of course, if there was drug paraphernalia or drugs in the house, we would have a choice at that point whether or not to issue a charge and have you come down to the court later or arrest you. And of course, if we had chosen to arrest you, then we would need to get somebody from health and welfare to come and take custody temporarily of your kids while you were going through arrest procedures and so forth at the jail. After this was explained to her, she got up, walked out of the room, and came back with a marijuana pipe. After which it was taken. They charged her with possession of drug paraphernalia and gave her a day to appear in court. They didn't take the kids or anything like that. They gave her the citation there. She got a lawyer. The lawyer asked for that evidence to be dismissed under the exclusionary rule on the grounds that she was under emotional, undue distress from what had occurred and what the officers had said in that particular scenario. Okay? Follow-up questions.
So they said all of this in a living room?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got that? Do you have enough information?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, I was a prosecutor on this, so maybe I'm like coloring it a little bit in from that perspective, because I'm looking at it going, they told her what they could legally be entitled to do and so forth. Needless to say, she was feeling very, very uncomfortable. Did she want to be arrested? No. Did she want them to come around with a dog? No. Did she want there to be, the kids taken temporarily? No. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you guys. Anybody questions or arguments? Or should we go straight to a vote? Yes?
So is that normal procedure to tell you exactly what's going to happen if you were found?
It turned out to be pretty darn efficient on that occasion.
Or only if they ask, right? If you come to me, you're a police officer, and you tell me, Judge, you know, we've been hearing that you've been cooking heroin. I don't know why I'd be cooking heroin. But if I was, and you said, alright, so if this is true, this is what's gonna happen to you, this is what's gonna be taken.
Oh, police officers explain it all the time. In fact, what they'll do is they'll like take the two perps and put them in separate rooms and say, we're having a conversation with each of you. And you know, we haven't decided what charges are going to be brought yet, but if either of you elects to cooperate, that will weigh heavily on, oh, I want a deal. I want a deal. Who's going to make a deal?
No.
Who's going to make a deal and testify against the other one? Nope, nope, nope. And then you're like, there's no way he would go against me. And they're like, it's too late. Your time for making a deal is gone. He just made a deal. You understand that? So a lot of times the police will do that. Questions or other comments? Yes, go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't say it was like intimidation or anything because they weren't like actually making threats. They were saying like okay, if we found something, this is what is going to happen.
That's what I said. All right, you guys ready? How many of you guys are going to say, no, that was too much undue pressure in the situation, the woman was feeling like, you know, the presence of the police and the authorities, and that was a violation of her Fourth Amendment rights? Throw the evidence out. Throw the evidence out. Throw the evidence out. How many of you guys are like, no, keep the evidence in? She voluntarily went and that and so forth. I wish you guys were the judge on that day because I lost on that day. The evidence was thrown out. It was excluded. There was nothing. Case dismissed. You're like, Mr. Hant, you must have sucked as a judge. No, I mean, it's like, I don't know, maybe because I'm presenting it like in such a way now. You know. All right. Oh my gosh. Some softy judge. Anyway, whatever. Whatevs. All right, now, next one. Okay? Right against self-incrimination. Okay, ooh, this is a good one. Right against self-incrimination. No one can be compelled to answer a question that could lead to a criminal prosecution of that person. Okay? You don't have to testify against yourself. Right against self-incrimination. That's easy. Now notice, some stuff is going to happen when we get a little bit of exclusionary rule in there, and then we throw in some, you have to be informed about this. But if you didn't know they had a right to remain silent, you might be like, and you're like, oh, thank you very much, officer. That's going to be really helpful in our case. Got that? Yes?
Question. If you rattle off a bunch of stuff before they say the give you your...
What do you mean, what rights are you talking about?
The Fifth Amendment, the right to incriminate.
Oh, that?
They have to...
Miranda rights? Who the heck is Miranda rights? We didn't have Miranda rights before 1966, and now we do. Now we have Miranda rights. Fifth Amendment. You got a right to remain silent. But we're going to put some teeth into that when we get the Miranda decision in 1966. And the exclusionary rule is going to come in there. So if we don't tell you that you have a right to remain silent, and you're like, psh, psh, confess, confess, confess. Can we use that in court? No. No. Yes, go ahead.
So if you rattle off a bunch of stuff before they tell you, they can't use that you're guilty 100% in court?
No, we can use the words that you've spoken against you. Yeah. We're going to get to the Miranda rights. Oh my gosh. This is like so much. 13th Amendment, you can't be enslaved. All right, we did that one. Can your parents enslave you and force you to do work? Your parents are not the government. But yeah, I suppose. All right, next time we'll get into Sixth Amendment, right to competent counsel, and we'll get into some more of these ones and so forth. Yeah, let's do that. Okay? All right, wipe her down, and then you guys are free to go. Oy, 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 oy.